I thought it was just a favor, just a quick neighborly gesture. But what started as an innocent knock became the moment that shattered my marriage. It started on a Friday evening. I had just gotten home from work, tired and aching for some quiet. My husband, Cameron, was out of town again, some real estate convention in Chicago. We hadn't been talking much lately. His texts were short. His phone calls felt rushed. And the worst part? I couldn't tell if it was the distance or if I was just getting used to feeling alone. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and grabbed a beer from the fridge. The sun was sinking low, casting long orange shadows to the blinds, when I heard a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just unexpected. I paused. It was almost 8 p.m. No one ever knocked around here, unless it was a delivery. When I opened the door, there he was, Dylan, my neighbor, the guy who had moved into the unit across the courtyard 3 months ago. I'd seen him around, jogging in the mornings, watering his plants shirtless, sometimes nodding at me politely in the parking lot. Late 20s, maybe 30, clean cut, a little scruffy in the jaw, with eyes that never quite gave away what he was thinking. "Hey," he said, smiling a little awkwardly. "Sorry to bother you. I just kind of need a hand." I blinked. "Oh, sure. What's going on?" "My kitchen faucet's leaking like crazy. I was trying to tighten something underneath, and I think I messed it up worse. Water's dripping everywhere. I called maintenance, but you know how slow they are." I did know. It took them 2 weeks just to fix our closet door. "Come take a look?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, of course. Let me grab some tools." His apartment felt lived in. Bookshelves, records stacked in a corner, a canvas half-painted propped up on an easel by the window. It smelled like cinnamon and paint. Not in a bad way, warm, earthy, like someone actually lived and breathed here. The opposite of the cold, sterile silence I left behind in mine. The faucet situation was exactly what he described. A mess. I crouched under the sink, fiddling with the wrench, trying to keep the dripping water from soaking my shirt. Dylan knelt beside me, holding the flashlight. "Thanks again," he said. "I know it's random." "No problem." I muttered, tightening a pipe. Honestly, kind of glad for the distraction. He looked at me sideways. "Rough week." I paused, then gave a small chuckle. "You could say that." The conversation stalled for a bit, just a sound of wrench, the occasional drip, but there was something in the air, something quiet and heavy, like we were both holding back something we didn't have the words for yet. After a few more twists, the leak slowed. Not perfect, but better. "That should hold for now," I said, standing up and wiping my hands. "You're a lifesaver," Dylan said. "Can I at least offer you a drink?" I should have said no, but I didn't. A few minutes later, we were sitting on his couch. 2 beers, some old vinyl playing in the background. I had only meant to stay 10 minutes, but the minutes melted into an hour. We talked about nothing and everything. He told me about his ex, a guy from New York who'd broken his heart and left him stranded in a city that never felt like home. I told him about Cameron, about how we used to be close, how everything now felt like walking on eggshells. I didn't mean to open up, but Dylan had this way of listening, like he wasn't just hearing the words, but everything behind them. At some point, he leaned back on the couch, stretched out, and looked at me. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he asked. I looked at him. "Yeah," I said, "all the time." What happened next was subtle. No lines were crossed. Not yet, but the room shifted. The silence between us became something new, something unspoken but loud. His knee brushed against mine. He didn't pull away, and I didn't either. "I should probably go," I said, finally standing up, the tension in my chest sharp and unfamiliar. He stood to, walked me to the door. We stood there, in the faint light from the hallway, just looking at each other. "Thanks again," he said softly. "Yeah," I replied. "Anytime." I stepped outside. The night air hit me, cool and sobering. I walked back to my place, heart pounding harder than it should have. I didn't sleep much that night. because as much as I told myself nothing happened, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me, like he saw through all the layers I was hiding under. The days after that late-night favor were confusing. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a neighbor helping a neighbor. But if it really was nothing, why couldn't I stop thinking about him? Every time I stepped into my backyard, I found myself glancing toward Damon's house. And more often than not, he was already outside, watering plants that didn't need watering, cleaning a car that was already spotless, or sitting on his porch pretending to be lost in his phone. But I knew he wasn't. His eyes would drift casually but deliberately to mine. Or maybe I was the one doing the drifting. I couldn't tell anymore. Inside my own home, things felt colder. My husband, Josh, didn't suspect a thing. Not yet. He was always busy, always on a call, staring at a screen, replying to messages that seemed more urgent than anything I had to say. Dinner's in the fridge. He'd mumble without looking up from his laptop. Love you. I'd say more from habit than hope. I used to believe that was just marriage. You fall in love, you get comfortable, and then you fade. Slowly, quietly. But lately, I felt invisible. Like I was a ghost passing through my own house, waiting for someone to look at me and actually see me. And then there was Damon, a stranger not so long ago. Now, he felt closer to real than anything I'd touched in months. 1 week after that first visit, I came home from work and saw him standing at the edge of his driveway. His arms were crossed, brow furrowed, like something was wrong. I hadn't even taken off my seatbelt before I found myself calling out through the open window. Hey, everything all right? He looked up, surprised for a split second, then gave a quick smile. Yeah, kind of. My AC's on the fritz, and this heat's just brutal. It was early June, and the humidity hung in the air like a wet blanket. Without thinking, I offered, "You want to take a look?" He hesitated for half a beat. "Only if it's not too much trouble." That word again, trouble. A part of me knew walking into his house a second time wasn't wise. But I told myself it was just a neighborly favor. Same as before. His place looked different in the daylight. The light warmed the wooden floors and painted shadows across the couch. It felt lived in and quiet, a little lonely but peaceful. I noticed things I hadn't the first time. Framed photos on the shelf, a half-finished puzzle on the table, a candle that smelled like cedar and citrus. "The thermostat's this way," he said, leading me toward the hallway. I crouched beside the old wall unit, examining it while Damon stood behind me, a little too close. "Sorry," he said with a chuckle. "Didn't mean to hover. I guess I just don't get a lot of visitors." I glanced back. "It's fine." But when I looked up, he was already staring at me, quietly, openly, not like a neighbor, not like a friend, like someone who had been waiting for someone to see them, really see them. "You ever feel like you're floating through your own life?" he asked softly. I froze, my fingers still resting on the plastic vent. "Every day," I said, my voice lower than I meant it to be. He exhaled slowly, like that answer released something he'd been holding inside. "You know," he continued, "before I moved here, I was in a relationship. 3 years. I thought it was the one. But he didn't really see me. I was just there. Convenient. Background noise." His words hit harder than they should have. Maybe because they felt like my own. "Did you ever cheat on him?" I asked. The question surprised even me. But Damon didn't flinch. He just shook his head. "No, but I wanted to. Not to get back at him. Just to feel wanted again." The honesty of that made my chest tighten. I understood too well. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans. Damon leaned against the wall, close enough that I could see the soft stubble on his jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the tiny details people miss when they stop paying attention. Then he asked, "You ever think about doing something you know you shouldn't?" I didn't answer right away. My heart was beating too loud, too fast. "Yeah," I said, "lately more than I should." We didn't touch. We didn't move. But something between us cracked open. Not physical. Not yet. But emotional. And maybe that was even more dangerous. I reset the thermostat. told him it should start working again. Then I headed toward the door, trying to put space between us, between what was said and what I felt. As I reached the handle, Damon said quietly, "If you ever want to talk or not talk, I'm here." I paused, hand still on the knob. I didn't look back. I just nodded and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. Josh lay beside me, breathing soft and steady, his back turned, his arm hanging off the side of the bed like he'd already let go of something without realizing it. I stared at the ceiling, Damon's words replaying in my head. "If you ever want to talk or not talk, I'm here." He wasn't flirting. He wasn't playing games. He was giving me a choice. And that made it worse somehow. The next morning, I pulled the curtains open. Damon was already on his porch, coffee in hand. He looked up, and for a brief moment, we locked eyes. I dropped the curtain, my chest tight, my hands sweating. I told myself I wouldn't go back over there, that nothing good would come from it. But Friday came, and there I was again at his front door. He opened it with a grin. "TV's fine. AC's perfect. What brings you here?" I shoved my hands into my pockets. "I don't know. I just needed to get out of my house." He didn't question it, just stepped aside. "Then come in." We didn't touch that day. We didn't even sit close. We stayed on opposite ends of the couch, 2 beers between us. We talked about work, childhood, music, regrets, fear, joy. I found myself telling him things I hadn't even told Josh, like how I felt small sometimes, like how I used to love drawing but hadn't touched a pencil in years, like how silence in my house wasn't peaceful. It was loud with all the things we didn't say. And he listened, not politely, not distractedly. He listened. That night, Josh was home early. He brought takeout. Chinese. My favorite, though he didn't say that. We sat across from each other in silence, chewing, avoiding eye contact. "Everything okay?" he asked between bites. I nodded, lied. "Yeah, just tired." He looked at me for a second longer than usual, but then he looked away. We didn't speak for the rest of dinner, and all I could think about was Damon. The following morning felt heavier than usual. I woke up to the hum of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. A message from my husband, Corey, blinked on the screen. "Hope you're settling in okay. The house is too quiet without you." I stared at those words longer than I should have. The guilt twisted in my chest like a knife. I hadn't even replied to his last message the night before. I could blame the move, the stress, the chaos, but deep down, I knew it was something else. No, someone else. I got out of bed and walked toward the living room window. The blinds were half open. From the corner of my eye, I saw him again. Noah, my neighbor. He was out front, shirtless, pulling weeds in the flower bed with headphones in his ears. His muscles moved with each tug of the roots. His brows furrowed in concentration. There was something unassuming about him. He didn't try to be seen. He just was. And yet, I couldn't stop watching. I quickly turned away, disgusted with myself. Married. I was married. This was just new neighbor curiosity. Maybe even loneliness. That had to be it. Or so I told myself. Later that afternoon, I was in the garage unpacking the last of the boxes. Sweat rolled down my back, and my shirt stuck to my skin. The Florida heat was ruthless. A knock. I turned. Noah stood at the edge of the garage, holding a small red cooler and wearing that same disarming smile. "You look like you could use something cold," he said, holding out the cooler. Inside were 2 bottles of Gatorade. "I figured lemonade might be too cliché," he added with a chuckle. I laughed, grateful and nervous. "You're going to spoil me if you keep this up." Noah leaned casually against the frame of the garage door. "Hey, what are neighbors for, right?" I took a long sip of the drink, avoiding his gaze. But I could feel it, that energy, that silent tension sitting between us, pulsing beneath every word. "You settling in okay?" he asked. "Yeah," slowly. "It's weird not having Corey around." "Your husband?" I nodded. "He traveling for work or something?" "Something like that," I said, unsure why I suddenly felt guarded. Noah nodded, as if he understood, without needing details. He looked away, letting the silence stretch. Well, he said finally, standing upright. If you ever want to grab a drink or just hang out, I'm usually around. Evenings are my off time. Thanks, I said. I might take you up on that. He smiled, turned, and walked away. But before he reached the end of the driveway, he glanced back, just for a second, and in that second, I knew I wasn't imagining the pull between us. That night, I sat alone on the patio, drink in hand. The stars were out, and the cicadas filled the silence with their relentless buzz. I saw a flicker of movement. Noah stepped out his back door, also holding a drink. We locked eyes across the yard. No words, just a shared moment of stillness. Then, without thinking, I stood up, walked to the side gate, and let myself out. He met me halfway. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Not really. You? Same. We sat on his porch steps, barely speaking, just sipping and watching the night settle over everything. The silence was comforting. Natural. You ever feel like you're just pretending to be who you're supposed to be? I asked. Noah looked at me, not surprised. Every day. The word sat between us, raw and honest. Back home, I said, I always knew the role. Corey is successful. I smile. I host dinners. I work part-time. Everyone thinks we're perfect. But you're not. No, not even close. He didn't offer advice or sympathy. Just sat there letting me speak. It was the first time in months I felt truly heard. Noah took a breath. My ex used to tell me I was too quiet. Said it made him nervous. Like I was always holding something back. Were you? He smiled faintly. Maybe. But sometimes you hold back because you're scared that once it's out, you can't put it back. The breeze kicked up. I shivered. Without a word, Noah reached into the house and grabbed a light throw blanket, draping it around my shoulders. Thanks. No problem. His fingers brushed mine, not on purpose. Or maybe it was. A few nights later, I was in the middle of a video call with Corey. He was in a hotel room, the city lights behind him. You should invite the neighbors over sometime, he said. You always used to love hosting. I forced a smile. Yeah, maybe. He didn't notice the pause. He rarely did anymore. We said our goodnights. I closed the laptop and stared into the dark screen. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. A message. Noah, still up? Me? Yeah, patio. 2 minutes later, he was there. We didn't talk that night. We just sat, shoulders nearly touching. The silence between us had grown louder, heavier, and almost unbearable. Then he turned his head slightly. You ever think about what your life would be like if you'd made one different choice? All the time, I whispered. He leaned closer. My heart thudded. I didn't move, but he didn't kiss me. He just placed his hand over mine. Warm, steady. That simple touch said everything. And it terrified me. The days passed. And so did the boundaries. We texted more, spoke longer. My world became divided. Daytime normalcy and nighttime confession. One evening, I invited him over. No excuse. Just come over. He brought wine. We sat on the couch, knees brushing. Why are you doing this? I asked. Doing what? Being here. With me. You know I'm not free. His gaze didn't flinch. Neither am I. But maybe that's the point. It was a quiet admittance. One that asked nothing but gave everything. He leaned in, and this time I didn't stop him. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. It wasn't just because Noah had fallen asleep on my couch or the fact that his body had been so close to mine the night before. It was something deeper, something that kept humming inside me like a quiet engine I couldn't shut off. For the first time in months, I didn't feel numb. I felt alive. I stood in the kitchen, making coffee. The aroma filled the air, warm and grounding. Noah shuffled in, rubbing his eyes, wearing the same t-shirt from last night, his hair a mess of curls that somehow made him even more boyish. Morning, he mumbled, his voice still thick with sleep. Morning, I said, handing him a mug. Our fingers brushed again. I noticed the way he hesitated, just for a second, before wrapping his hands around it. You sleep okay?" I asked. "Better than I have in a long time," he replied. We didn't talk about last night. Not directly. The way we sat on the couch. The way our legs had touched. The way he had leaned into me like I was the only safe place in his world. But it lingered between us, unspoken and electric. As the day wore on, we both tried to pretend like everything was normal. He helped me trim some bushes in the yard. We talked about nothing. TV shows, bad coffee, funny neighbors. But every laugh, every glance felt loaded. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Noah sat cross-legged on my back porch while I grilled burgers. The golden hour lit his skin in a way that made it hard to look away. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I don't think I've ever felt this comfortable, not with anyone." I looked over at him, flipping the burger. "Why is that?" "I don't know. Maybe because you see me, not just what I try to show the world." I turned off the grill and handed him a plate. "That's what neighbors are for, right?" I said, trying to keep it light. He smiled, but it was a sad kind of smile. "I wish I lived next to you my whole life." That night, after dinner, we ended up back on the couch. A movie played, but neither of us was watching. The air between us was thick, with things unsaid. "I should probably head back," Noah said, standing up but not moving. "You don't have to," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me for a long moment. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because I know what it feels like to be stuck in a life that doesn't feel like yours anymore." And that's when it happened. He stepped closer. "So, did I? I didn't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. Maybe it was inevitable. But suddenly, our lips were inches apart, and then they weren't. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, but then it deepened, not because of lust, but because of relief, because we had both been holding our breath for so long, and finally we could exhale. When we pulled apart, Noah rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you opened your door." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. He stayed again that night, but this time he didn't sleep on the couch. We didn't rush things. There was no frenzy. No blur of clothes on the floor, just slow, honest closeness. We held each other like we were both afraid to wake up and find out it was a dream. The next morning, I woke before him. I watched him sleep, one arm draped over his face, the sunlight creeping across his bare shoulder. My heart ached, not with guilt, not yet, but with the knowledge that something had changed, something I couldn't take back. Noah stirred, blinked, and looked at me. "Hey! Hey!" I whispered. He sat up, pulling the blanket with him. "Last night wasn't a mistake, was it?" "No," I said. "It wasn't." He let out a breath like he'd been waiting for that answer. "I don't want to go back today." "You don't have to," I said without thinking. "I do. Eventually." And we both knew that was true. But for now, we pretended that time had stopped. We made breakfast together, sat on the floor with our knees touching, and laughed about stupid things. It felt like a life we could have had, some alternate universe where we had met at the right time, not in the middle of two unraveling marriages. When he finally left that evening, he didn't kiss me goodbye. He just stood there, holding my gaze, then walked away. The silence after the door closed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Later that night, I sat alone on the porch, sipping from a mug he had used that morning. It still smelled faintly like his cologne. The stars were out, but they looked different, like they were watching me, asking if I understood what I had just done. The truth was I didn't. All I knew was that I didn't feel alone anymore, but I also didn't feel free, and that scared me. The days that followed were anything but quiet. Ever since that night at Jesse's place, my world had been split in two, before him and after him. I tried to go back to normal. I went to work, came home, even tried to sit through a movie with Cameron. But something had changed inside me, and it wasn't just guilt. It was this unbearable pull, like something had been awakened that I couldn't shove back into hiding. Cameron, for his part, seemed none the wiser. If anything, he was in better spirits than usual. He laughed more, even started planning a weekend getaway for the two of us, something we hadn't done in over a year. We could use a little spark, he said over dinner one night. And all I could do was nod, my throat tightening with shame. How could I look him in the eye knowing what I'd done? But I couldn't stop thinking about Jesse. The way he looked at me like I was something more than a routine. The way his voice softened when he said my name. The way he made me feel seen, like really deeply seen. I knew I had crossed a line, but I didn't regret it. And that terrified me. One evening, I found myself standing at my living room window, the neighborhood bathed in orange twilight. Jesse's house was visible from mine, just past a row of trimmed hedges and a stretch of picket fence. I saw him outside, coiling a garden hose, his shirt clinging to his back with sweat. My chest tightened. I should have walked away. I should have closed the curtain and reminded myself of all the reasons why this had to stop. But instead, I walked out the door and made my way toward him, like I had no control over my own feet. He looked up the moment he saw me approaching. That familiar smile formed slowly on his face, like he'd been hoping I'd show up. "Hey," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't think I'd see you again." I wasn't planning to, I admitted, my voice barely louder than the wind. "But here you are." "Yeah." He tossed the rag onto the porch and leaned against the railing. "You want to come in?" I shook my head. "No, just wanted to see you." "Why?" "I don't know. Maybe I missed you." Jesse's eyes softened. "That makes two of us." We stood there in silence, the sky darkening above us. "I can't keep doing this," I finally said. "Doing what?" he asked. "Lying. Sneaking around. Feeling like I'm losing pieces of myself every time I go back home." Jesse looked down at his hands. "I get it. I care about you," I whispered. He looked up. "Then why does it sound like goodbye?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. All I knew was that I was unraveling, and he was the only place I felt real. That night, I told Cameron I was going out for a drive to clear my head. Instead, I ended up at the edge of the lake 2 towns over, the same Lake Cameron and I used to visit when we first started dating. I sat on a bench and watched the moonlight shimmer across the water, wondering how love could drift so far, without either of you noticing until it was gone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Jesse. "I don't want to be a secret." I didn't reply. I couldn't. But those words burned in my chest the whole night. The next morning, everything changed. Cameron found my burner phone. I'd been careless. Left it in the glove compartment of my car. He was looking for a flashlight, and instead, he found a second phone filled with messages. Every one of them a truth I hadn't dared to say out loud. When I got home, he was waiting in the kitchen. The phone was on the counter between us, like a loaded gun. "Who is he?" Cameron asked, his voice cold, too steady. I couldn't speak. "Tell me?" I swallowed hard. "His name is Jesse. He's our neighbor." Cameron let out a bitter laugh. "Jesus, of course. Of course it's Jesse. I always thought he looked at you weird." "It wasn't like that," I tried to say, but he cut me off. "You've been lying to me for how long?" I didn't answer. "Do you love him?" My silence told him everything. He shook his head and stepped back. "I knew we were fading, but I didn't think you'd just replace me." "It wasn't about replacing you," I said. "It was about finding something I hadn't felt in years." "Then why didn't you just leave?" I didn't have an answer. Because leaving meant destroying the life we'd built, and staying meant destroying myself. Cameron packed a bag and left that night. The house felt hollow without him, but I didn't cry. I think part of me had already grieved us long before Jesse ever knocked on my door. A few days passed. Jesse didn't text. He didn't call. And then one evening he showed up. I heard the knock and knew it wasn't before I even opened the door. He stood there, looking unsure for the first time since I'd met him. "I heard," he said. I nodded. "Are you okay?" "I don't know." He stepped inside without asking. We stood in the living room, the air thick between us. "I didn't mean to ruin your life," Jesse whispered. "You didn't ruin it. You reminded me what it's like to feel." "Do you want this to be real?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked at him, the fear in his eyes, the hope. "I think I do." "Then let's stop hiding." For the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply. Maybe this was the start of something honest. Maybe love isn't always neat. Maybe it breaks you open and shows you who you really are. But whatever this was, it wasn't a secret anymore. The week that followed was unlike any other. I tried to keep life normal, acting like nothing happened between me and Liam. But something had shifted. Deep down, I felt it every time I glanced across the street and caught him looking back at me. We hadn't spoken since that night in my apartment, but the silence between us was thick with tension and longing. Still, I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. Not when I saw him every day. Not when the memory of his kiss still burned on my lips. That Friday it all came to a head. I was taking out the trash when I noticed Liam standing in his driveway, his wife loading their 2 toddlers into the SUV. He looked exhausted, hair messy, circles under his eyes. Our gazes met for a fraction of a second. That was all it took. I knew I had to talk to him. I waited until evening. Once his family was gone, maybe grocery shopping, maybe just out, I took a deep breath and walked over. My heart was pounding the entire way. He opened the door almost immediately. It was like he was expecting me. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Hey, can we talk?" I asked. He nodded and stepped aside. I walked in, instantly hit by the familiar smell of laundry detergent and worn leather furniture. It was homey, but it didn't feel like his home. Not really. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, like strangers. I haven't been able to stop thinking about what happened. I began trying to steady my voice. He sighed and rubbed his temples. Me neither. It's all I think about. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't just conflicted. He was hurting. "Are you okay?" He shook his head. "I'm not. I've never felt this pulled in 2 directions. What we did, it wasn't just a mistake. It was something I wanted, something I still want. But I have a family. I have kids." I swallowed hard. "I never wanted to be the reason you felt torn. I didn't plan for any of this." He looked at me, his eyes tired but honest. Neither did I. But here we are. The room fell silent again. And then he asked, "Do you think I'm a bad person?" I shook my head slowly. "No. I think you're someone who's been pretending for a long time. And now, for once, you're feeling something real." His jaw clenched, and he looked away, ashamed. "I've been lying to myself for years. I told myself I loved her, and I do in some ways. But I've never felt for her what I feel when I look at you. It's terrifying." I leaned forward. "You don't have to decide right now, but you do need to stop lying to yourself. Whatever you choose, just make sure it's real." He didn't respond right away. But then, after what felt like forever, he nodded. I left that night with no promises, no dramatic confessions, just the understanding that something had changed in both of us. But things didn't stay calm for long. The next day, chaos arrived. I woke up to frantic knocks on my door. It was my neighbor 2 doors down, Marcy, wide-eyed and panicked. "You need to come out here. Now." Still in my pajamas, I followed her to the street, where a small crowd had gathered around Liam's house. Red and blue lights flashed across the pavement. 2 police cruisers were parked outside. I froze. Liam was standing on his front porch, visibly shaken. His wife was crying as she held their children close. Officers stood between them, trying to calm everyone down. My stomach sank. Someone had found out. I didn't even know how or what had triggered it. Maybe someone saw him come over that night. Maybe a message was left open on a screen. Maybe it was something his wife had felt in her gut for months and finally decided to confront. Whatever it was, it exploded. I stayed at a distance, watching. My heart was racing, my hands ice cold. An officer eventually escorted Liam inside, while his wife was led to their car, kids still clinging to her. Neighbors whispered around me. I caught my name once, twice. By the next morning, the entire block was buzzing. Rumors flew faster than facts. Some said it was about money. Others hinted at an affair. One lady boldly asked me at the mailbox, "Did you hear what happened with Liam?" I played dumb, but inside I was crumbling. A few days passed. Liam didn't leave the house. His wife and kids were gone. No one saw them leave, but the house had gone silent. On the fifth day, a note appeared on my doorstep. Folded, plain, just my name on the front. Inside, one sentence. Can you meet me tonight on the back porch? No signature, but I didn't need one. That evening, after the sun had dipped low, I crossed the yard. Liam sat there alone in the dark with just a single candle flickering beside him. He looked up when he heard my steps. You came. Of course. Are you okay? He shook his head. No, but I needed to see you, to say this face to face. He looked broken, exhausted, his face pale under the soft candlelight. She found out. Not everything, but enough. A text, something I forgot to delete. I denied it at first, tried to cover it, but the guilt ate me alive. I confessed. I told her about us. Not in detail, but enough. I stayed silent, letting him speak. She left with the kids. Said she needed time. Maybe forever. I don't blame her. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He looked at me. Don't be. What happened between us? It wasn't wrong. Not in my heart. It was the most honest thing I've done in years. I held his gaze. So, what now? He took a breath, deep and shaky. Now I figure out who I am, without the mask, without pretending. I don't know what the future looks like yet, but I want to stop living a lie. I squeeze his hand gently. Whatever happens next, I'm here, even if it's just as someone who sees the real you. He didn't answer, just leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. That simple touch held everything. Fear, hope, regret, and something new just starting to bloom. The candle flickered in the breeze. Behind us, the neighborhood slept. Ahead of us, something uncertain waited. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel scary. It felt real. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning light slicing through the blinds in thin golden bars. My coffee had gone cold, but I hadn't touched it in over an hour. My head was pounding. Not from alcohol or lack of sleep, but from the relentless circling of thoughts. How had it come to this? Ezra, my neighbor, my temptation, my betrayal. I kept going back to the beginning. His knock on my door, that polite smile, the slight nervousness in his voice. He had asked for help, just a minor favor. It had seemed so harmless. And yet now, everything had unraveled. Michael hadn't come home last night, and it wasn't just a fight. I knew the silence in his absence. There was finality in it, like something sacred had been broken and could never be put back together. And Ezra? He hadn't messaged me since I told him about Michael finding out. The boy who had become the center of my emotional storm had vanished just as quickly as he arrived in my life. But part of me didn't blame him. I stared at the photos on the wall, vacations, dinners, parties. Michael and I had built a life, a beautiful one. From the outside, it looked perfect. Inside, though, the ride started long before Ezra ever came along. It just took someone like him to expose it. That afternoon, I heard a knock. For a moment, my heart dropped. I thought it was Ezra. But when I opened the door, it was Michael. He looked tired. Not angry. Just tired. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked in, his eyes scanning the space as if trying to decide whether it still felt like home. We sat down, and the silence stretched between us like a rope about to snap. I'm not here to scream, he said quietly. I just need to understand. I didn't lie. I didn't sugarcoat. I told him the truth. How I felt lonely. How Ezra came into my life unexpectedly. How the connection wasn't planned. I didn't go looking for him, I said. But I didn't stop it, either. I failed you. I failed us. Michael sat still, eyes glossy. Then he nodded slowly. I already knew before I saw the messages, he whispered. I saw it in your eyes weeks ago. You were somewhere else, with someone else. I swallowed hard. I never stopped loving you. I believe you, he said. But love isn't always enough. Not when it turns into something we say just to avoid silence. I couldn't argue. He stood up. I'll be staying at my sister's for now. I need space. And maybe you do too. To figure out who you are without all the pretending. When the door shut behind him, It echoed, not like a slam, but like a chapter ending. Days passed. Ezra didn't show up. I tried to distract myself, running errands, cleaning the house, even returning to work. But every time I turned a corner in the neighborhood, I half expected to see him. And then one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I saw him walking his dog, hoodie up, avoiding eye contact. I didn't call out. I followed at a distance. He turned into the trail by the woods, the same place we used to walk, talk, touch. I picked up my pace. Ezra, he froze, then slowly turned around. There was surprise in his eyes and something else. I didn't think you'd want to see me, he said. I wasn't sure if you'd ever want to see me either. We stood there, the evening air tense. I'm sorry for what I dragged you into, I said. You didn't deserve any of this. He shook his head. Don't do that. Don't make me a victim. I knew exactly what I was doing. I just didn't think I'd fall for someone who already belonged to someone else. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I don't belong to anyone anymore. Ezra looked down at the ground. You hurt him, and you hurt yourself too, and maybe me a little. I nodded. I know. He sighed. I was angry at first. I hated that I let myself become part of something messy. But then I realized maybe we all were just looking for connection in the wrong places. The silence between us felt softer now. Where do we go from here? I asked. Ezra met my eyes. We don't go anywhere, not like before. But maybe we can talk. Be honest. See what's left, if anything. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a fantasy. But it was real. And that was enough. Over the next few weeks, we started talking again. Not late-night visits. No stolen touches. Just walks. Conversations. Sometimes we didn't talk about us at all. We talked about movies, food, our families, our mistakes. It felt strange at first, but freeing. I also started therapy. For the first time in years, I began unpacking the things I'd buried. Resentment, insecurity, the fear of being invisible. Michael and I spoke occasionally. Not about reconciliation, but closure. We both needed to heal separately before we could even think about anything together or apart. One afternoon, months later, Ezra and I sat on a bench by the lake. He was reading a book. I was just watching the water move. You think we'll ever go back to what we were? He asked. I shook my head. No, but maybe we can be something better. Something real. He smiled. I'd like that. And for the first time in what felt like years, I smiled too. Not from guilt, not from confusion, but from hope. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or simply held your attention to the end, please like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional, real, and raw storytelling. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever faced a moment where a simple connection changed everything? You're not alone. We tell stories that speak to your truth. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. There's more to come.